The wind screamed like a wounded animal across the mountain peaks, driving snow into every crack and crevice of the weathered cabin. Torin sat hunched over his workbench, carefully guiding his carving knife along a piece of cedar, coaxing out the shape of a bird's wing hidden within the grain. The fireplace crackled behind him, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with his finished works, wooden sculptures of forest creatures, each so lifelike they seemed ready to leap from their shelves. This was his sanctuary. 7 years he'd lived here, high in the Frostpine Mountains, far from the chaos of the valley cities below. 7 years since he'd walked away from everything his family's expectations. His former life as a carpenter in the bustling trade district, the woman who'd chosen his brother over him. Here, he had silence. Here, he had peace. The blizzard outside intensified, rattling the shutters. Torin barely noticed. He'd weathered worse storms. Then came the sound that shattered his solitude. A thud against his door. Not the wind. Something heavier, more deliberate. A scraping noise followed, like fingernails clawing at wood. Torin set down his tools and crossed to the door, his brow furrowed. No one came up here, especially not in weather like this. The nearest settlement was a 2-day trek through treacherous passes. He grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace. Not that he expected trouble, but caution had kept him alive this long. He opened the door a crack. The wind hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. But through the swirling white chaos, he saw her. A woman collapsed against his doorframe, her arms wrapped around 2 small figures. Her skin was the color of twilight, a deep, luminous purple that marked her as Colisean, one of the alien races that had settled on Earth decades ago. But her elegant features were twisted in desperation, her lips cracked and bleeding from the cold. The tattered remains of what had once been fine silk robes clung to her trembling frame. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the storm. "My children, ... The 2 small beings huddled against her were clearly suffering worse. The older child, maybe 6 or 7 in human years, had eyes half closed, barely conscious. The younger one, no more than 4, wasn't moving at all. Torin's hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. "Get inside, now." He stepped back, and the woman half crawled, half dragged herself and her children across the threshold. The moment they were clear, Torin slammed the door against the howling wind and dropped the latch. For a moment, relative silence compared to the storm. Just the crackling fire and the sound of labored breathing. The woman had collapsed onto his floor, curling her body around her children like a shield. Frost clung to her hair, which was a striking silver white, unusual even for her species. Torin could see her shoulders shaking, whether from cold or exhaustion or fear, he couldn't tell. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice gruff. She shook her head weakly. Torin muttered something under his breath and moved into action. He'd seen hypothermia before, during his years in these mountains. First rule, warmth. He grabbed every blanket he owned, which admittedly wasn't many, and wrapped them around the woman and children. Then dragged cushions from his bed to create a nest near the fire. "Don't put them too close to the flames," he said, more to himself than to her. "Slow warming. That's the key." He stoked the fire higher, then hurried to his small kitchen area. Hot liquid, that's what they needed. He had tea, some dried herbs, a bit of honey. His hands worked quickly, efficiently, filling his kettle and hanging it over the fire. When he turned back, the woman was watching him with eyes the color of amber beautiful eyes, he noted despite himself, filled with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. I didn't think. I didn't know if anyone." "Save your strength," Torin interrupted. "How long were you out there?" 2 days. Maybe 3. I lost track. 3 days in this? He looked at her with disbelief mixed with respect. The Colisean were hardy, but this storm would have killed most humans in hours. Where were you heading? Anywhere. Her voice broke. Anywhere you wouldn't find us. Torin filed that information away. Someone was chasing them. He'd deal with that later. The kettle began to whistle. He poured the tea, added generous amounts of honey, and brought it to her. Small sips. And get some into the children if you can. She took the cup with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving his face. I can pay you. I have. I had jewelry. It must still be. She fumbled at her throat, where a delicate chain hung. This is worth. I don't want your jewelry. Then what? The desperation in her voice sharpened. What do you want? I'll work. I'll clean, cook, anything. I know I don't look it now, but I can be useful. I can, she swallowed hard. I can warm your bed, if that's the price. Just please don't send my children back into that storm. The offer hung in the air between them. Heavy with her shame and fear, Torin felt something twist in his chest, anger at whatever had driven this woman to such desperation, pity for her situation, and a fierce protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. Lady, he said quietly, I'm not that kind of man. You can stay until the storm passes and you're strong enough to travel. No payment needed. She stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. Why? Because, Torin said, turning back to add more wood to the fire, no child should freeze to death because adults made mistakes. He heard her breath catch, then the sound of quiet weeping. Not loud or dramatic, just the exhausted tears of someone who had been strong for too long. The younger child stirred, making a small whimpering sound. The woman immediately focused on her daughter, helping her sip the warm tea, murmuring soft reassurances in a melodic language Torin didn't understand as he watched them. Torin felt the careful walls he'd built around his solitary life beginning to crack. These weren't just strangers seeking temporary shelter. They were refugees, running from something or someone that terrified them. And despite every instinct telling him to stay uninvolved, to maintain his isolation, he knew that the moment he'd opened that door, his peaceful exile had ended. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, a different kind of thaw had begun. The blizzard lasted 3 days. During that time, Torin's small cabin became a world unto itself, a fragile bubble of warmth suspended in an ocean of white fury. The woman introduced herself as Silene on the second morning, her voice still hoarse but steadier. Her daughters were Myra, the older one with curious violet eyes, and Jex, the younger who clung to her mother like a shadow. Torin had given them his bed, insisting he was comfortable by the fire. It wasn't entirely true. His back ached from sleeping on the floor, but he'd endured worse discomfort. What unsettled him more was how quickly he'd grown accustomed to their presence. The silence he'd cherished for 7 years suddenly felt less like peace and more like loneliness. On the third morning, Silene emerged from the bedroom, looking almost alive again. The deathly pallor had left her twilight skin, replaced by a soft luminescence that seemed to glow in the firelight. She'd braided her silver hair away from her face, revealing the elegant bone structure of her kind high cheekbones, a graceful neck, features that were both alien and somehow achingly familiar. You're staring, she said softly, catching him watching her. Torin quickly looked away, feeling heat rise to his face. Just making sure you're not going to collapse again. You nearly died on my doorstep. I know. She moved to the fire, extending her hands toward the warmth. I haven't properly thanked you. What you did taking us in without question, giving us your bed, your food most wouldn't have. Especially not for someone like me. Someone like you? She glanced at him, those amber eyes unreadable. An outsider. An alien. A woman with no husband and too much trouble following her. Torin poured her a cup of morning tea from the pot he kept perpetually warm. I've never cared much about what people are. Only what they do. Then you're rare among your kind. She accepted the tea gratefully. In my experience, humans are selective in their kindness. So are Calicians, from what I've heard. A bitter smile crossed her lips. You're not wrong. The children were still sleeping, their small forms barely visible under the pile of blankets. Torin had noticed how Silene constantly checked on them. Even in the night, he'd wake to find her standing over them, counting their breaths, making sure they still lived. They'll be all right, he said. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for. Are they? Silene's voice cracked slightly. Myra hasn't spoken since we fled. And Jex has nightmares every night. They've seen things children shouldn't see. Torin didn't press for details. Instead, he said, I'm making breakfast. Do Calician children eat eggs? They eat anything right now. We've been surviving on stolen scraps and whatever I could forage. She paused. I meant what I said before. I want to help. I can't just take and take without giving something back. You're recovering. That's enough. It's not enough for me. Steel entered her voice. I was raised to believe I was useless, ornamental. I'd like to prove otherwise, even if only to myself. Torin studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Can you cook? Poorly? Chop wood? I'd probably lose a finger. So? She hesitated. Actually, yes. I can sew. It was one of the few skills considered appropriate for a noblewoman. Noblewoman? Torin raised an eyebrow. Silene looked away. Former noblewoman. That life is dead. There are some torn clothes in the chest by the window, and my winter coat has a rip in the shoulder I've been meaning to fix. Relief flooded her face. I can do that. Thank you for letting me be useful. As Torin prepared breakfast eggs from his small coop out back, bread he'd baked days before, some preserved berries, he found himself acutely aware of her presence. The way she moved around his space, careful not to disturb his things. The soft humming under her breath as she examined his damaged coat. The gentleness in her hands as she woke her daughters for food. Mira and Jex ate like they were starving, which they probably were. Torin made sure they had seconds, then thirds. Silene barely touched her own plate until the children were satisfied. You need to eat too, Torin said firmly. You can't take care of them if you're weak. I'm fine. You're not. Eat. Something in his tone made her obey. As she ate, color returned to her cheeks, and Torin felt an unexpected satisfaction watching her regain strength. After breakfast, while the storm continued to rage outside, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Torin returned to his carving, while Silene settled by the window with his coat and a sewing kit. The children played quietly with wooden blocks Torin had carved years ago for a nephew he'd never given them to. What are you making? Silene asked, watching his hands work. A fox. Or trying to. The wood has other ideas. May I see? He handed her the half-finished piece. She turned it over in her hands, her fingers tracing the emerging form. It's beautiful. You have real talent. It passes the time. Is that why you're here? Hiding away in the mountains? Passing time? The question was too perceptive. Torin took the carving back. We all have our reasons for running. Yes, Silene said quietly. We do. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. The children's soft laughter as they played created a melody Torin hadn't realized his life was missing. Tell me about him, Torin said suddenly. Silene's hands stilled on the coat. Who? The man you're running from. She was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, his name is Ven. We were bonded, That's what my people call marriage through arrangement. I was 17. He was 43. Torin's jaw tightened. It's common among Calician nobility, Silene continued, her voice flat, emotionless. Young women married to older men to secure alliances. I was told I was lucky. Ven was wealthy, powerful, from one of the great houses. I should have been grateful. Were you? I tried to be. For years I tried. She looked down at the coat in her lap. He wasn't cruel, not at first. Just ... absent. I was decoration, nothing more. Then I became pregnant with Mira, and suddenly I mattered. A child meant an heir, meant securing his bloodline. But you had daughters. 2 daughters. Silene's laugh was bitter. In Calician culture, sons inherit everything. Daughters are traded away in marriage, just as I was. When Mira was born, Ven was disappointed, but hopeful we'd try again. When Jex came, she swallowed hard. He said I'd failed him, that I was cursed. His family agreed. They wanted him to dissolve our bond, to cast me out and try again with a younger woman. But you escaped first. I wasn't going to let them take my children. I heard them talking one night. Ven's mother said the girls could be useful, married off young to strengthen alliances. Mira was only 5. Jex was 2. Her hands clenched into fists. I packed what I could carry, took the girls, and ran. That was 4 months ago. 4 months? Torin stared at her. You've been running for 4 months? Ven doesn't like to lose his possessions. He sent hunters. We've been moving constantly, never staying anywhere more than a few days. But the money ran out. The jewelry I sold barely got us this far north. I thought maybe in these mountains he wouldn't find us. He will, Torin said quietly. Men like that always do. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. But maybe I can give my daughters a few more days of peace before then. Torin set down his carving and moved to sit across from her. What if you didn't have to keep running? What do you mean? Stay here. At least until spring. The passes will be snowed in for another 2 months at least. No one's coming up here until the thaw. You don't understand what you're offering. If Ven finds out you helped me, let me worry about Ven. He's dangerous, Torin. He has resources, connections. Hunters who won't hesitate to. Silene. He reached out, surprising them both, and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond helping her inside that first night. Her skin was warm, softer than he expected. I'm not afraid of your husband. You should be. Maybe. But I'm more afraid of what happens to you and those girls if I send you back out into the cold. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Why? Why would you risk yourself for strangers? Torin looked at Mira and Jex, playing innocently by the fire, oblivious to their mother's pain. He thought of his own childhood, of his father's stern demands and his mother's quiet suffering, of the brother who'd stolen his future and the woman who'd broken his heart. Of all the times he'd wished someone had simply chosen kindness over convenience. Because someone should, he said finally. And it might as well be me. A tear escaped down Silene's cheek. She squeezed his hand, and for a moment they simply held on to each other, 2 damaged souls, finding unexpected anchor in a storm that had nothing to do with weather. Outside, the wind began to ease. The blizzard was finally breaking dot, but inside the cabin, something new was beginning, something neither of them was quite ready to name. But both of them could feel growing in the spaces between words, in the warmth of held hands, in the gentle hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd both found something worth staying for.